Hello everyone, I'm Don, and welcome to my kitchen. Today it's all about pasta. We're going to go step by step through making pasta the traditional way. Let's go through our ingredients. It's very important to maintain the exact weights of these ingredients to make this pasta work for you. So we have 300 grams of all-purpose flour. We got 3 large egg yolks. We got 2 whole eggs. We've got some water for reserve, and you'll see what that's for. And we got 1 teaspoon of salt. So what we're going to do is you're going to need a kitchen scale. I have it zeroed out, so we're going to go ahead and add our 3 large egg yolks, and we're going to add our 2 whole eggs. And right now it is weighing 156 grams. We need to bring that to 185 grams, and that's what our reserve water is for. So you're going to just trickle it in. And there you go. We've got 185 grams. So from there we just go ahead and we add our 1 teaspoon of salt. And we're going to go ahead and scramble those eggs up. Now this method of making pasta, and there's many different methods that you can use, but this is the traditional method. It's called the well method. So on a surface, whether it's a cutting board or your countertop, you're going to want to place your 300 grams of flour. And you want to make a little hole in the middle, basically a little volcano here, and you're going to gradually add in your egg mixture. And I'm not going to put it all in at once. I'm going to put in about 1/4 at a time. And you want to just start to scramble that. And as you're scrambling it, it's pulling the flour in from the sides. And you may end up springing a leak with this at some point. And don't worry about it. It all has to come together regardless. So it's getting a little stiff, so I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit more of this egg mixture, maybe another 1/4 of it, and continue to scramble it in, pulling more of that in. And you can take your fork and just kind of pull it in as well. And you're going to continue to do this, obviously, till all your egg mixture is in and it's going to be incorporated into the flour. And right now it's really wet. And it's going to get to the point where working with it with a fork is going to be a little hard to do, so we'll end up going to our hands. Okay, let's go ahead and add some more of this. I'm going to pull some flour in. Like I said, you want to just keep dragging that flour into the egg mixture. Like I said, it got a little leak over on the side here, but that's pretty typical. In some cases, much worse. Believe me, I've been down the road where my egg was running across the countertop right from the get-go, so don't worry. It all needs to come together eventually anyways. So the best thing you can do is to be prepared. I've got a bench scraper, or I call it a dough scraper. I keep that on standby because eventually we're going to start folding in all that flour directly into the egg mix. So I'm going to add more of that. In part 2 of this all about pasta. We're going to be using some mechanical methods, some machinery to do this, and I have not done it that way. I've always done it this way, but from what I understand, it's going to be a real time saver. And so in part 2, we'll get to see how that works out. It's going to be a first for me. Alright, so that's the end of our egg mixture, and it's getting away from me here. So we just keep pulling it in, mixing it with that flour. We want to try to maintain all our ingredients as much as we can. So what I usually do is I just take the scraper, and you can see we're still very wet in the middle, and start folding that the flour into the egg mixture. And eventually we'll get in there with our hands, but for now we want to get that flour. And I kind of chop at it a little bit too to open up the moisture so it soaks in that flour. Typically with those measured ingredients, there's never a need to add anything above and beyond. I guess you could have certain circumstances with the humidity conditions in your home. Right now I'm in the middle of winter, my house is probably a little dry. So I do have some water on standby, because that's what you would add to this if you needed to, but ideally, and by the recipe, you should not have to add anything in. Alright, so at this point I'm going to go ahead and get in there with my hands, and I'm going to just start to form and work it in. It's sticky, and you can see it's still got a lot of stickiness to it. And we typically don't add any flour to it, and we shouldn't have to add any flour to it. Now you're going to want to knead it by hand a good 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, until it gets to be nice and smooth, and then it's got to rest for a little bit. But we're not going to make you go through all that, so we'll speed through this, and when we're done, we'll move on. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, and quite frankly, I'm tired. What we need to do is let this rest. It lets the glutens relax, and makes it more pliable, makes it easier to work with. Right now, it'd be pretty difficult to work with. But we do need to wrap it up in some plastic wrap, otherwise it will dry. And I'm going to just sit it. We don't have to do anything with it other than sit it on the counter. Now, you could potentially wrap this in plastic, put it in a freezer bag, and freeze it for up to 3 months and make pasta down the road. Or you could refrigerate it and do it tomorrow. You can only get by a day or so in the refrigerator, but freezing it really works out well. You can also do, and we'll talk about freezing it and other methods such as drying it as we get back. So we're going to go ahead and take a break while this relaxes and rests for about 30 minutes. Okay. Okay, we'll be back. Okay, so we're back. It's been 30 minutes while our dough has rested. I've cut it into quarters. The recipe makes 1 pound of pasta, so we're going to do a 1/4 pound here. So you're going to take your 1/4 of it. You want to ultimately try to get this into as much of a rectangle as you can to start with. And I've taken and dusted this with some semolina flour, which works really well for just the dusting process. Some people actually mix it in with their pasta too. They'll do a 50-50 mix with the regular flour and the semolina flour, or all semolina flour. But it gives a more density to the pasta. It makes it harder to work with one, and as when you're eating it, you can certainly tell. So we're going to start with our machine set at its widest point, which is number 1. And we're going to go ahead and run it through. And when it comes out, you want to go ahead and fold it over, kind of like an envelope. But you want to keep it within the width of the machine here. And if it's getting sticky, you want to add a little more flour to it. So still on number 1, we're going to turn it. And I'm going to go ahead and fold it. And I'm trying to form the most rectangular piece that I can. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and step it up to number 2. Now, we're going to go through each setting twice. You know, I never used the machine until the last year or so, and my grandmother used to cut them just by hand, always on the table, kitchen table. She cut both her soup noodles and her pasta noodles. So it's getting a little tacky, so I want to go ahead and flour it again, and we'll go through our second time on number 2. And once you do this, you can get through it pretty quickly. So now I bumped it up to number 3. And once you get it in there, let the back just drop off and hang. And so you're seeing it's getting wider, it's getting thinner. So we'll go again on number 3. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut some spaghetti and linguine. So we're going to take it to a number 6 setting, which is what I use a lot when you're making like a ravioli. The things that I make with this are your typical flat pastas, your spaghetti, your linguine, your lasagna noodles. I do cannelloni shells. I do manicotti. There's a lot you can do with this. If you had a machine that extruded pasta, you could have shaped pastas. You could also make little bow ties if you want. So we're going to set that to our number 6 setting. And this is going to be it for... And on your last pass, you're going to only want to go through once. It gets a little harder to deal with. All right. So if you were to use like lasagna, you could just take a knife and cut this in half, square it up, and you'll end up with your lasagna noodles. Cut them off at your length. When I make a cannelloni, this machine here, and most of them I think come with this, it's a dual little cutter, and the idea is that you can run it and it cuts it evenly, so when you're running it through the pasta end, you're pretty squared off. You're not going to end up with a little teeny sliver here. I use it a lot too because I make different types of cannelloni. So you can see that this will square up your piece. And to make a cannelloni, I typically just exactly the same width, and they're almost perfect for a cannelloni shell. For the purposes of just demonstrating quickly how we can do your flat pasta like spaghetti or linguine, which our machine does, I'm going to go ahead and cut this in half. Once again, you want to make sure you're not sticky. Ideally, too, you can let it sit and dry a little while too. If you're making a bunch of it, you stack it. Make sure you got some flour in between them so they don't stick together. And by the time you're done with all of them, you can start with your very first one. But you can go right into it. You can actually see. You can almost see through this. I don't know if you can see it. You can see my hand through it. You can go thinner, but this is about where I like it for spaghetti, linguine, for the cannelloni, ravioli, maybe a little thinner even for ravioli. You can go thicker for a manicotti, you know. So we'll go ahead and cut some linguine. There's two different places with two different settings here to cut your pastas. So you're going to want to get your hand underneath here. Now typically I wouldn't cut them like this. I would have probably ran that whole piece through, and then when they would hang about down to here. And when it finished drying, it will take a good overnight to dry this on a rack like this. If you dry them on the flat, it's going to take a couple days. But if you're drying, say, the total length of these noodles, when you take these off, they're going to be hard. They're going to be like similar to a store-bought. You're going to break them at that joint. So you're going to end up with, hopefully, a couple somewhat equal pieces. That's one method. The other method is you can freeze this. You can take this and you can put it right on a cookie sheet, throw it in the freezer, let it get frozen, throw it in some Ziploc bags, and you're good to go. We'll go ahead and cut some spaghetti real quick. Okay. Now, if you're going to do it on the flat, you want to make sure you're good and coated, because the moisture can come out in these things and they'll end up sticking together. So I'm just getting them good and coated, and then they call it making a nest, and you're going to just turn it in on itself until you end up with a little bird's nest. You can pick the whole thing up and put it on a cookie sheet or a baking sheet that's got some flour on it, and then work your way. And since we actually, this would be a complete quarter pound if we made one whole quarter pound of each. This would be a bigger bird's nest, obviously, and then you could freeze it that way. And a quarter pound is probably just about right for, you know, one or two people, maybe three people. So I'm going to go ahead and take this. We're going to do the same thing. And I'm going to ultimately freeze mine. Freezing has been the way I've been going because it will last 3 months in the freezer. And you take it out and you dump it, drop it in some boiling water, and it's done in a matter of minutes. In fact, if you wanted to cook it right now, you could. You want to salt your water, and you want to make it pretty salty. Almost like a cup for like 3 quarts of water, 4 quarts of water. And then you would put it in for like a minute to 2 minutes. It starts to float up, and then you want to take it out. and it's ready to eat. And I got to tell you, since I love fresh pasta over store-bought, but I do buy store-bought. I mean, let's face it, sometimes it's just convenient. Sometimes I cook for a large group of people at work, or for my daughter and her friends down at college, and sometimes I make fresh, sometimes I give them the store-bought, and they're never a complaint, I can tell you that. So that's the end of part one. Part two, we're going to go a little bit more mechanical. We're going to use a different means to roll it with my KitchenAid mixer, and we're going to also use a food processor to actually mix the dough, which I've never done. And I'm also going to make have a little twist on it. We're not going to make your regular pasta. So come back and see me in part two. Thanks for stopping by.